All right, welcome back to the Ottawa studios of Inside My Canoe Head. I am your host, Dr. D. Today we start off the holiday season back to basics. We got about 6 episodes out here for you where we're going to wrap the holidays in some fundamentals of preparedness. A lot of fun. Sometimes we just got to check back in with the first principles. So sit back, grab yourself your favorite beverage. Let's get at her. A little bit of electronic music for everybody never hurts. Thanks again for joining us back here at Inside My Canoe Head. We appreciate all of the feedback you continue to give us over at www.insidemycanoehead.ca. Everything is going tickety-boo. We're coming up to the close of another wonderful, wonderful year. A tough year for some people, a challenge for others, a devastating for a few. But together, we build preparedness through the community. So, as part of the holiday season, while everybody is taking care of all of the wonderful things and tasks and gatherings that we have, remembering those that we lost and going through the entire process of reviewing and reconsidering 2024, we're going to offer you a series of podcasts that are going to be all about the basics, getting back to preparedness basics, getting a bit out of, worried about how does political change in a European focus of certain public policy can affect your downstream distribution analysis. That may be a little bit too complex for the holidays, so we're going to get back to simple. Today, we're going to start off with personal responsibility. We're starting here because everything that we do in the world of preparedness, and in fact, I would argue your larger life, which is what we encourage here at Inside My Canoe Head, always starts with a simple and undeniable question. The most important question in preparedness is simply, who is responsible for your outcomes? Everything else follows from that question. If you believe that there is somebody else or some external agency who is responsible for providing you a positive outcome to a situation, there's not much we can do here to help you. We'll try to give you advice, but in the end, you're just going to be a victim. However, should you realize and choose that you are responsible for your outcomes, however that may look, that it's my fault whether I am successful or whether I'm unsuccessful in some initiative or project that I undertake in life, that I am not a victim, I'm not oppressed, I'm not held back, I'm not prevented, and the world is not against me. And we reflect on this because a lot of that nomenclature and a lot of that ideology is very popular in today's world, right? It's part of a cultural ideological pendulum swing that the world periodically goes through in a generational sense. It's not anything new. It's not like we're talking about issues and things that are somehow just now apparent and real in the later in the 21st century. But the reality is that in the end, as the Stoics very much phrase it, you are responsible for very little, and that's wonderful. You are literally responsible for what you say and what you do. All the other things that happen around you are exogenous to you, which means they're external, which means you can't control who wins an election. You can't control whether the bank of whatever country you're in reduces the interest rates. You can't control whether somebody can give you a mortgage or not give you a mortgage. You can't control whether you get fired or hired. You can contribute to those things. You can do your best in the initiative. But in the end, there is very little that is up to you. Accepting personal responsibility for your outcomes mean you are going to set yourself on the correct path. You are going to make the decisions necessary to pursue your dreams and your goals, that whether you're successful or not, it'll be up to you, right? And a lot of times we're not successful. And sometimes we have a really big problem in our society of accepting failure. A lot of times failure is viewed as just that. You've done something wrong. You were ineffective. You didn't meet the minimal acceptable standard. You were not competitive in a group of your peers. In other words, everybody else was better than you. We don't look at failure as training. because that's in reality what it is. You fail and fail repeatedly on something, you're learning. You're learning a new skill set. You're trying to achieve something new. You're trying to take aboard a new level of knowledge. You're writing a set of exams. You're doing something and you're unsuccessful the first time around. You learn from it, right? I wasn't picked up for promotion this time around. Great. I've got more opportunities to make my file more competitive. It's all a frame in how you do. And when we celebrate, maybe not celebrate, but if we accept that failure is a very much an important and necessary part of learning, then as a society, when you go out and you try to do things and you don't fail, and you do fail, you don't expect a participation medal. You don't expect anybody to pat you on the back, right? They always said, what's the worst position at the Olympics? Well, it's number 4, right? The first 3 get up on stage, they get medals, they get flags hung from the ceiling. The 4th guy or girl gets a certificate and off you go, have a good time, thanks for coming out, right? But that's okay. It's a meritocracy, it's a competition. And a lot of times, probably more often than not, in a competition for something, you are going to fail. We don't normalize that enough, and that's perfectly acceptable, right? I've failed a lot of times. People who go bankrupt in their businesses are often looked at failures. No, they took a gamble, they rolled the dice, and they were unsuccessful. Their creditors, whether it's themselves, their family, the bank, or whatever, are going to have to take 30 cents on the dollar as they liquidate the assets, and then they're going to come back. I guess the estimates out of Forbes is somewhere between 5 and 6 times the average millionaire goes bankrupt before they bust 7 figures, right? So going bankrupt is not a bad thing. There's bankruptcy laws and rules in place. You take a job, you grab some capital, you persuade some people to lend you some money, some pretty high rates of return. You go after a dream and you're unsuccessful. You did nothing wrong. You didn't fail because somebody held you back or oppressed you. The idea of personal responsibility is all about you will do the best possible that you can and that you will accept the results. And that's kind of another thing that we talk about a lot in preparedness is amor fati, which is another Stoic Latin phrase that's popular. It says love fate. And it basically means maybe you don't love what's going on, but you accept the fact that you did everything within your control. You did everything you could to the best possible extent. And then the world, it is what it is. And it's not oppression. It's not being held back. It's not victimization. It's you were unsuccessful. Welcome to the world of trials and tribulations, right? And this is really important in preparedness because when you realize that you are responsible for your outcomes, then you accept the fact that as a human being living in the world, living in the place you've chosen. Now, I'm going to paraphrase this by saying, I'm going to accept the fact that you are living in a democracy, which means out of the 193 countries in the world, I think it's a number 168 or 170, are considered democracies simply from the perspective of the individual has the right to leave, right? You're not held back at the borders, prevented, denied a passport, etc. You have the ability to leave. So what I'm saying is, at least internally to your country, you have the authority to move around and the right to move around. What that means is, where you currently live, you have accepted the risk profile for that area. Now, you may not have signed a form and you may not have sat down and say, well, I wonder where I want to live. I wonder what the risks are here. And let me make a risk-informed decision. No, you chose where you live because you liked it. You chose it because your friends and family were there, because of the adventures you wanted were there. Maybe it was a great employment. Maybe you were chasing a potential future spouse. Whatever it may be, life brought you to the place you are. The realization that if you decide to stay, by default, you've accepted to live in the risks that are present in the area. Now, you may not know anything about those risks, and most people don't take the time to reflect on that. But personal responsibility says, hey, I've decided to live, and everybody knows the Ottawa studios of Inside My Canoe Head. I'm in the city of Ottawa, Canada, right? So by living here, and I can live anywhere in Canada, I have the right to mobility under the Canadian Constitution. I choose to live here in Ottawa for a lot of personal reasons that are highly irrelevant to this conversation. I therefore accept by default the risks related from political, economic, cultural, familial, and natural hazards being realized, right? So if we just look at the 20% that people think preparedness is all the time when they just think about natural hazards or natural disasters, I live in an earthquake zone, okay? We get tornadoes here. We don't get hurricanes. We periodically get floods, but not in the part of the city where I live. But part of the city may flood and may inhibit what I can do. So all of these things I accept by staying here. If I don't want to live in an earthquake zone, I can go to a part of Canada that's not in an earthquake zone. But since I've decided to live here, I'm inside an earthquake zone. So now I have an accepted risk, right? So that's a risk along with the tornadoes that whipped through. I think it was 2018. We had 6 in one day, destroyed a couple of different parts of the city. These are, I don't want to call them normal, but these are fairly predictable things that do occur around here. And we have some wicked storms and ice storms, etc. So when you understand the risk profile around you, that's a personal responsibility. You now know it's there. So what are you going to do about it? You then have other things related to your life, like other personal risk profile. I mean, you accepted the natural hazard risk, but what about all the other risks? We live in a modern, technologically enabled society, right? Not very few of us are in yurts off the grid or way out in rural Canada or rural America. So because of that, we basically operate because of 10 sectors of critical infrastructure. If you think about where you live right now and you look around the room you're in or the car you're in or wherever you are, and you consider all of the systems that run the world around you, think about when you got up this morning, all of the buttons you assumed would work. From the light switch to the coffee maker to the toilet flushing to all of the other systems that you just assumed when you got up this morning would work perfectly fine, right? There are 10 sectors of critical infrastructure that I argue are the 10 supporting legs of our modern technologically enabled society. If you envision that as a dining room table with 10 legs, each one of those legs helps support the ongoing society, but they exist right below your sight line because you don't pay any attention, and nor does really anybody, let's be frank. Whether the transportation system or the point of sale system or financial access system or the cellular network, like you flipped on your cell phone this morning, just assuming that your network provider was on, right? And that, oh, by the way, your cell phone would turn on and that the Wi-Fi data button would be working. And we could go on and on about all of the systems that happen just below the surface and we consider them normal. You have a risk profile against that, right? What does your world look like when one of those 10 sectors of critical infrastructure are no longer available to you? What if your access to that is withdrawn? And we don't care why. This is not a question of earthquake, flood, hazard, terrorist attack, whatever it may be. All those reasons I don't care about. I just want you to consider and think about what does your world look like when you lose access to the modern transportation system, right? So if I tell you, sorry, but the highway is not available to you. They've closed down the highway. Or public transport has been removed in the city of New York, right? For the next, 72 hours, 4 days, 5 days, all buses, subways, and trains in and out of New York City are shut down. What does New York City look like if you live there, right? But that's the type of thing that we consider. Now, some of them you may think are a little bit outrageous, but what happens if you lose access to your local hospital if it has to close, right? Say there was a chemical leak inside of a building and you lose access to it, right? It could be, again, we don't care why. But if I said to you, you live in rural United States of America and your local hospital just closed, what does that do for you? So for a lot of people, it's going to be irrelevant. But for some people, it's going to be critical because maybe they have dialysis there 2 or 3 times a week. Maybe they have regular checkup appointments that they need to go to. Maybe I'm a person who needs public sector transportation or public transportation every day to get to and from work. And if I don't get on the bus or the subway, I don't get paid. And if I don't get paid, that causes a whole bunch of other follow-on systemic problems. So you can see for the most part that a lot of these systems are not going to have consequential effects on your life. But individually, you and your neighbor and your different family members are going to have some pretty significant differences as to your dependency on the sector's critical infrastructure. It provides a risk profile for you. Now, we've explained the natural hazard risk profile. We've explained your critical infrastructure risk profile. Now you have a look at saying, okay, what's your tolerance? And this is really neat about individual. When you think about personal responsibility, we have to look at it through the lens of your personal tolerance, your risk tolerance. Now, there are people out there in the listening audience who are quite happy jumping out into a snowstorm with an eighth tank of gas and driving across town. Says, yeah, whatever, I can deal with it, no problem. And then there are some people who get worried when their gas tank goes below 3/4. Some people are risk adverse and some people are not. Some people need a considerable amount of planning to ensure every eventuality is covered and everybody knows what to do. And some people will wing it. They'll just get on and get after it, and they'll see what happens and they'll just deal with it. Part of that is to deal with your own self-confidence in your ability to manage chaotic situations, rapid onset chaotic situations. That's a reflect you have. That's your personality. There's no good or bad answer, right? Being quite capable of navigating rapid onset chaotic events is a skill set. But if you're not that person, it doesn't mean you're weaker or lesser. There are some people who work far better with a far more deliberate world, and some people have a shoot from the hip world. If you understand yourself, and part of personal responsibility is accepting who you are, looking that incredible person in the mirror, smiling, high-fiving them in the morning, and telling you are incredible, you're wonderful, you're beautiful, you're handsome, let's get after it today. That kind of thing builds a lot of personal character. It builds a lot of personal support. Are you self-reliant? And self-reliant simply means, do you have the knowledge and skill sets to navigate a lot of things? Do you have the ability to figure things out on the fly? Do you have a lot of training in different areas, a different knowledge, different skill sets? That's all a measure of self-reliance, right? And so self-sufficiency really means, do you have the ability with the tools and resources to leverage that self-reliance, your skill sets, and do it forward? And as you start to do an honest personal reflection on yourself, you're like, okay, hey, listen, I do well in chaotic situations, or I don't. And because I don't, I'm probably going to need a higher degree and level of preparedness for the loss of access to critical infrastructure. You start to see each one of these things that we talk about on the podcast start to come into play. I know who I am. I know I don't do well with rapid onset chaotic events. I want to be as prepared as I possibly can. I want to feel like I'm not worried and anxious about the future. And that starts to and I live in an area that has this hazard. And because I have this personality, it equates that I'm probably going to want to have a higher degree of preparedness in the essence of how I'm going to attack my family preparedness plan. And the idea behind your personal preparedness or your family preparedness plan is saying, okay, I understand the environment in which I live. I understand my family and all of their individual needs. And I've realized that I'm going to have the trifecta of preparedness plans. And this is the extent of personal responsibility to saying, hey, listen, I have these risk profiles. I have this personality status, not disorder, but personality status. And this is who I am, right? And so I'm responsible for this interesting group of folks. Call it my family, call it your, and remember, family can also be multi-generational, multi-location. You can have family members in retirement homes, people a couple of communities over. Generally, we like to think about people who are going to turn to you for assistance in chaotic times. So you know where you live and the hazards. You've looked at the critical infrastructure. You kind of understand for whom you're responsible. You know yourself. And now you've got to figure out, there's a trifecta of preparedness plans out there that are designed simply to allow you to reflect what is the likely things that you need to be ready to do. And I say that because there's several different theories in preparedness education. The principal one that's out there is look at hazard-specific profiles. So if I live in an earthquake zone, what is my plan for an earthquake? What's my plan for a flood? My argument to you is the research doesn't support breaking it down by that. Because what the research and the evidence clearly shows is that when we get to a certain point, people become agnostic and apathetic, which means they simply ignore and walk away from the idea of preparedness when you present them with a whole series of things that they have to be ready for and a whole series of things that they have to do, and they're all going to differ depending what the threat is. You start to create this behemoth that is unwieldy, and basically everything is going to get ignored. And this is what happens a lot with the current preparedness communications programs that are enacted by public sector. And when we talk about personal responsibility, and when we talk about how to define the basic level of preparedness, the basic preparedness plan that you want to get to, it's very, very simple. What we want you to be able to do is shelter in place is your solution. It's your default solution. Whenever there is a significant event that causes significant disruption in normal operations and you have not overcome it, you need to shelter in place. And shelter in place simply means that you and your family will recover back to home. Now, the next day you may be right back after it. This is not about hunkering down, putting up the billboards, bringing out your non-perishable foods and turning on your flashlights and waiting for somebody external to save you. Sheltering in place means you recover, everybody comes back to the house. The reason we always recommend and state that it's almost irrefutable in the evidence, but not 100%. If you recover to your home, you gain two principal valuable assets. Number one, everything you own is there. And I'm going to tell you, I could go down 17 different preparedness checklists, and 90% of that is already in your house. You may not have it organized, you may not have it collected and put together in a certain way, but it's all going to be there, right? So the first thing that you gain by sheltering in place as your default move is everything is there. The second is the unsung hero of preparedness, which is maintaining positive mental health. Stress and anxiety will do more harm to you in times of chaos than the actual event itself. Your family feels safe at home, where all their stuff is, where their beds are, where their home, where all their possessions are, where all their joy and happiness has occurred, where the food they like to eat is, where everything exists in their home is where they want to be. It's where they feel safe. And feeling safe and feeling loved are the two most greatest things that it can assist in the time of an emergency. So shelter in place is your default position because your house is your home. It's your castle. You have everything there. And guess what? Every day you've survived to this point in your life based solely off the things that are in your home now. So some Yahoo coming out of left field giving you 10 things you got to go buy for preparedness is a fool. Why? Because you have already survived to this point with everything that's in your house. And I'm sitting here to tell you, as somebody who's done well over a decade of research on household and community preparedness, everything you need is already in your house, right? Now, when we do your preparedness plan and we move you along that spectrum and we say to you, okay, how long do you want to be able to shelter in your house for? People, you've heard the size, 72 hours, 3 days, 14 days, 30 days. Again, it goes back to how comfortable you are from a risk profile. How comfortable do you feel with elongated timelines of reduction of access to critical infrastructure? Because remember, everything about the emergency is not the event that occurred. It's the event that took down one of the sectors of critical infrastructure and how long it's going to be for those sectors to get back up on board. If you want to look for the statistical evidence, we've done a study here at Preparedness Labs Incorporated, our our parent company, and we found that 94% of the critical infrastructure sectors across North America were restored within 14 days of failure. Okay? The other 6% is for catastrophic loss. So if you have a tornado takes out the water treatment plant, you're not building that back in 14 days. But 94% of the time you are going to be correct in that all of the 10 sectors of critical infrastructure will be restored in your area, which is what we define as normalcy. So your life will return back to normal and normal operations will resume because of that, right? So some people say 3 days, some people say 14, some people say 30. I recommend 14 as a baseline because the evidence shows that is intelligent in a modern technologically enabled society. Now, if you are slightly more risk adverse, if you want to be a little bit more prepared than that, then you can move that date forward. You can say, I would rather be, even though the stats say 94% probability of everything being restored within 14 days, I'm comfortable with 30. Great. All that 30 means, all this timeline means, and this is a very simplistic but evidence-based explanation for this, okay? All the timeline means is that you will be responsible for providing the animalistic requirements of those who are sheltering with you. Animalistic requirements being food, water, shelter, health, safety, and security. You're required to provide those for that period of time. That's all it is. That's what your shelter-in-place timeline is. I recommend 14 days. People go out to 30. My personal standard right now is 90 days. And that's, I'm not bragging. I'm not saying that's the right standard. I'm saying for my circumstances, which I generally don't discuss here on the podcast, I've incrementally over time, over a period of 5 or 6 years, moved it from 14 days to 90 days, which means the people for whom I'm responsible, which is a fixed figure of human beings, I'm able to provide them food, water, shelter, health, safety, and security in my residence without access to those 10 sectors of critical infrastructure, right? That's the caveat. How long can you provide food, water, shelter, health, safety, and security to your people that are in your house that you've defined as your family for the timeline you choose? That's your shelter-in-place equation. It's really that simple. It's no more complicated. You put it on paper and you figure it out. We've got all of that stuff over on our incredible video course that we have at preparednesslabs.ca. You drop over to our website there. Everything that we offer is there. It is a paid video course. It's 199 Canadian and a lot less American, thanks to the exchange rates. But it's 4.5 hours of video lessons supported by a whole series of workbooks that set you and your family up for success. Now, the great benefit of this course, and I'll take a second here to advocate for this, is that not just you get that information, but you get lifetime access to the course as we add chapters. But we hold monthly webinars, right? We hold monthly webinars on preparedness that you get free access to once you enroll in this course and pay the money. You never have to pay another dollar. You get an invite to our Zoom webinar. It's a popular 30-30 format, which means it's 30 minutes of me talking about the latest breakthroughs in preparedness this month, the latest issues that have come up, what the latest piece of academic research is telling us about preparedness, and then we got 30 minutes to answer your questions. And those happen every month on a fixed date. Send you an email just for enrolling in the course, and there you go. So that's the benefit of getting it. So if we just think of shelter in place. Now, shelter in place is going to work for the 97% of the time you don't have to evacuate. The 3% of the time you have to evacuate, you, my friends, need an evacuation plan. Full stop, right? So we've broken down again on the course, and it's in our book, Preparedness Simplified, Book 1, The Beginning, that's available on the website as well, over on Amazon. It's very, very simple. Your evacuation plan contains 3 simple steps. 1, the first thing you need to determine in an evacuation plan is where are you going? Full stop. You need right now, in times of peace and calm, to know absolutely and unquestionably when you have to or are told to evacuate your residence, where are you going to? The Motel 6 and a public shelter is a horrible idea. They'll do, but they're incredibly expensive, zero privacy, and they're not the places where you want to rebuild your life if you have to. Know exactly where you're going. Friend or family's location where you can drop in and take their basement. Number one. Number two is make your plan for evacuation ahead of time, which means I'm going to take the following items. I'm going to go the following route, and this is how I'm going to do it. And it's all written down in advance, right? Because when the balloon goes up, and this is something you learn, and it's a common saying that we use all the time, special operations soldiers and police SWAT teams and organizations like that do well in chaos, not because they're uber crazy, wonderful people. It's because the saying is true. You don't rise to the occasion, you fall to the level of your training. And when you've trained repeatedly on something, then no matter how chaotic it is, it's muscle movements. You react the same way. When a stacked group of 4 individuals clear a room, when they've practiced this 1,500 times, it doesn't matter the chaos that's around them when they got to clear a room. Everybody will do exactly what they're supposed to do. They do it so often, they can't get it wrong. In preparedness, we talk about putting everything down and setting out your evacuation checklist in a written format. Why? So that when you get a moment's notice, chaos goes through the roof, everybody's naturally panicking, you're trying to figure out what to do. In that moment, you are executing a well-understood plan that you created, that's printed out, that's readily available. You grab it and you don't think, you do. That's how evacuations are successful. Not you running around trying to remember what to grab, not you remembering who's going to get who. For example, and I offer this in the video course and I offer this in the book. If you are, imagine you're the standard North American family, the Ward Cleaver, mom and dad working in 2 different places and kids working at school in 3 different schools. Okay? Balloon goes up, city needs to evacuate. I don't care what the reason is. Who's getting the kids? Or are you going to try to text and figure that out in the middle of the chaotic situation? Who's getting who, who's going where, and what's the rendezvous location and what's the alternate rendezvous location? Because you can't assume that the cellular network will be available for you to text and talk once the balloon goes up, right? A well-understood and well-practiced family evacuation plan, mom and dad both know which kids they're going to get. They know which routes they're going to use to go get the kids. And oh, by the way, they're also intimately knowledgeable of their child's school evacuation plan and what does the school board intend to do with your children in a significant disruption when the school building itself is no longer available for use, right? Think about it. Well-rehearsed plans are execute. You know where you're going and you know what everybody's going to do, and then you don't need to talk to each other. It just happens. People make it happen. You don't want to be the one running around, banging away in your cell phone, trying to get a text through or a call through to somebody in the middle of a chaos situation to try to see what's doing when other people are just getting in their vehicles and they're going to point A to get point B, to get task C, to meet at rendezvous D. And you're trying to figure out what's going on in a text message. That's preparedness. Costs no money. You just make the plan. Everybody understands it. Everybody's got a copy of it. And the last part about preparedness is simply having a plan of what to do next. Now, people think it's always ridiculous to sit down and say, well, what am I going to do when my house burns down? What am I going to do when... It's just cognitively going through the basic thoughts, right? And again, I'll return to the Stoics, say this often, is you get up in the morning and you say to yourself that today I know I'm going to meet with rude and unruly human beings. And this is how I intend to handle them. And then you're rightly probably going to meet up with a rude individual during the day and you've already thought about how to handle them. So the simplistic concept is when we evacuate the house and when we go to our next location and we've lost the house, this is what we intend to do. That's easier to execute than trying to figure out what you intend to do at the moment. Right now, the apathetic apologetic or agnostic viewpoint, depending on your lens you want to use, for much of preparedness is I'll deal with it when it happens, right? And you will. And you're a smart individual, and you'll probably figure out how to navigate it and be successful out the other end. I'm going to offer you this. I wanted one last reflection exercise before we close today's first episode in the holiday preparedness series. Think of the pandemic. Were you ready in March of 2020 to lose your job, have a bunch of shutdowns, and have significant economic impact? Were you ready? Because guess what? There were a group of people who were. They were ready. They had a plan for when they got fired. They had a plan for when their income disappeared. They had a plan for a significant event where they lost access to a sector of critical infrastructure. Because remember, this is all the pandemic is. Short of getting a flu and a significant problem for some with compromised health systems, the biggest impact of the pandemic was the restrictions and the loss of access to certain parts of critical infrastructure in the world. What was your plan for it? What was your plan when you did nothing wrong and your income disappeared? What was your plan, right? Because people had those plans and they pivoted within 30 days onto their alternate source of income and they launched off of it. And some people did very well economically through the pandemic. What did the vast majority of people do? They simply sat on their butt on their couch and waited for some magical exterior force to come in and make everything go back to normal, right? That was their plan. They didn't have a plan. They just sat back and said, oh, well, everything's shut down right now. I'm just going to sit around and wait until everything returns to normalcy. Well, how'd that do for you, big fella? How'd that do, right? So I'm just offering that because there was a small section of people who had robust preparedness, emergency plans, call them what you will. They pivoted, they targeted off, they had very little economic losses in the pandemic, and they did exceptionally well. And some of them built some pretty incredible businesses out of it. So no, like there is real evidence about people who do exceptionally well in chaos because they've built a simplistic preparedness plan that is not that complex, right? It really is not. But it all begins to circle back to our first topic with personal responsibility, understanding that it is not the government's role or some other external organization's role to take care of yourself and those for whom you're responsible. That's your key. Now, in the next couple episodes, we're going to talk about thriving and surviving in a community mindset. We're going to talk about a whole bunch of other really cool things about preparedness. But my friends, it all starts with that basic foundation. Are you going to accept responsibility for your outcomes, step up to the plate, as they say in our sports analogy, and make it happen? That's a choice you have to do. We have everything you need at Preparedness Labs Incorporated. You continue to follow us here at Inside My Canoe Head. Everything we provide here is free, whether it's on this podcast, over on our writing on Substack, or our soon-to-be-released YouTube video series similar to this. It's there for you, and it's free of charge. So thank you very much for joining us this episode on Inside My Canoe Head. I hope the holidays are going really, really well for you, and that your dreams are going to come true, and at least you have a chance to say thank you to somebody who made a difference for you this year and say you're grateful for having an opportunity to be around. And whether 2024 was successful or not, just adopt the attitude that it's your fault. If it was successful, it's your fault. If it wasn't successful, it's your fault. Learn the lessons, figure out what went right, figure out what went wrong, and set yourself up for success next year. Thank you very much. Take care. Stay safe.